Warning: the following podcast contains interesting facts and loud noises that may startle and surprise listeners. Those with heart conditions, a nervous disposition, or currently operating a motor vehicle should proceed with caution, or perhaps with a firm grip on their armrests. Listener discretion is advised.
Did you flinch? Is your heart beating a little faster? Maybe you even feel a little disorientated. Quite possibly, you're recovering from the effects of Startle. Hello everybody, I'm Phil Wilkes. Welcome aboard the Like a Pilot podcast, where we unveil the soft skills pilots utilise every time they strap into those high-speed aluminium and carbon fibre giants we call airliners. This show is your ticket to understanding the how and why behind what makes aviation one of the safest modes of travel. So, it's time to fasten your seatbelts and join me now as we embark on a journey through the skies, where pilot skills become the blueprints for high performance in any field. In aviation, or any field needing quick decision making, being able to bounce back from startle and surprise are important. How we respond could have life or death implications. Fortunately, the aviation manufacturers have provided pilots with a tool for this, and in this episode, we'll talk about why it's not a bad starting point for dealing with any unexpected events. Startle and surprise are normal reactions to unexpected events, but they differ in nature and intensity. Startle is our instinctive, involuntary response to a sudden, intense stimuli, such as a loud noise or sudden movement. Think back to the introduction to this episode. Did you jump or gasp? Experience blinking of the eyes, an increased heart rate, maybe an increased tension in your muscles, an adrenaline rush. Our startle response prepares us for potential danger. The physical effects of startle usually dissipate quickly. However, reacting before recovering from this reflex can lead to poor decisions and adverse outcomes. On April 6, 1993, China Eastern Airlines Flight 583, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11, was en route from Shanghai to Los Angeles when a crew member inadvertently extended slats, the high lift devices on the leading edge of an aircraft's wings. The sudden deployment caused the aircraft's nose to pitch up sharply. In response, the captain pushed the control column forward, inadvertently disengaging the autopilot and causing the nose to pitch down abruptly. Over the next several seconds, the captain's excessive control inputs led to multiple nose up and nose down oscillations, during which occupants either not wearing or loosely wearing seatbelts were thrown around the cabin. Tragically, 2 of the 255 people on board lost their lives, and over 150 sustained injuries. Then, there's the Olympic Airways Falcon 900 incident. On September 14, 1999, a Greek government Dassault Falcon 900B, being operated by Olympic Airways, was en route from Athens to Bucharest. During descent, crew actions inadvertently disengaged the autopilot. Over the next 24 seconds, the captain's inappropriate control inputs caused the aircraft to pitch violently, resulting in several oscillations and extreme G-forces. During this period, the captain's back and forth control adjustments led to 10 oscillations, subjecting the aircraft, crew, and passengers to forces ranging from 4.7 G in the positive to 3.26 G in the negative, far beyond the aircraft's safety limits of plus 2.6 G and minus 1 G. For context, most roller coasters operate within a range of plus 4 G to minus 1 G. Tragically, 7 of the 13 people on board lost their lives after being thrown around the cabin. Beyond highlighting why airlines emphasise the importance of keeping seatbelts fastened during flight, These incidents underscore how crucial it is for pilots to handle startle reactions before making controlled, measured responses. In contrast, surprise comes from a more cognitive realization that something isn't going as expected. Surprise is triggered when an unexpected event causes a discrepancy between our expected and actual circumstances. While startle is always associated with a physiological reaction, surprise may not elicit any immediate physical reaction at all. Maybe you were surprised to hear this episode begin with a disclaimer, but it probably didn't affect you physiologically. Surprise also elicits a broader emotional response than startle: positive, neutral, or negative. For example, think of how you personally feel about surprise parties. From a human performance perspective, the most important difference between startle and surprise is probably cognitive. While a startle can momentarily disrupt focus as we attempt to reconcile discrepancies in our expectations, the cognitive effect of surprise can last much longer as we begin to process that something unusual or out of the ordinary has happened. In our last episode, we looked in depth at Air France Flight 447. On June 1, 2009, while flying through clouds over the Atlantic, the pitot tubes of the Airbus A330 became obstructed by ice crystals, resulting in erroneous speed readings and the autopilot disengaging. Surprised by the sudden alarms and loss of automation, one pilot applied excessive nose-up inputs, which led the aircraft into a high-altitude aerodynamic stall. Despite multiple stall warnings and ample time to recover, the crew struggled to comprehend the situation, and, ultimately, they never regained control. The aircraft remained in a stalled condition as it descended until it impacted the Atlantic Ocean, claiming the lives of all 228 souls on board. At the very least, the effects of startle and surprise may serve as a distraction, disrupting our routines and eroding safety margins. At their worst, they may cause us to discard our learned procedures and skills, substituting them with inappropriate, intuitive reactions or hasty decision-making. Our brain processes a startle through two main pathways: a fast, instinctive route and a slower, more deliberate route. The faster pathway sends initial information from the thalamus to the amygdala, our evolutionary cave person brain. It has priority in response when dealing with perceived danger. It prompts a quick response and triggers the immediate physiological reactions we associate with startle. Simultaneously, the thalamus sends information to the neocortex, our thinking brain, along a slower, more analytical path. This second pathway allows for deeper evaluation, helping us to decide whether the threat is real or false, either sustaining our initial reaction or allowing us to relax. In our episode on decision-making, we discussed US Airways Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson. In the extremely rare situations requiring immediate action, those where our personal safety is at immediate risk, there is a need for predetermined procedures, responses that we have learned and trained for, memory checklists for pilots, the Dr. ABC protocol for first responders, or fire escape plans for residents. But what do we do if we are so overwhelmed by startle or surprise that we can't immediately draw on a checklist or protocol? What do we do if there is no checklist or protocol to fall back on? If you're a regular listener to Like a Pilot, you'll know that one constant in aviation is a continuous learning process that comes from investigating the causes of accidents and incidents. We've highlighted lessons from many examples through our episodes, and aviation's approach to managing the effects of startle and surprise is no different. According to data from ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the leading cause of fatalities in commercial aviation between 2001 and 2011 was loss of control in flight. Perhaps unsurprisingly, as seen in the incidents we've discussed, Startle and surprise reactions often contribute to inappropriate responses, which can lead up to loss of control events and other accidents. In response, ICAO, along with the aircraft manufacturers Airbus, ATR, Boeing, Bombardier, and Embraer, have incorporated startle and surprise mitigation into industry best practices for preventing and recovering from loss of control events. Let's take a look at the pilot's toolkit for handling startle and surprise. As always, there will be non-flying takeaway. Humans by nature are biased towards action. This bias can lead us to react before we've had time to fully assess the situation. So we need to have a procedure in place that gives us time for re-engaging our neocortex and allows us to make a considered response rather than a reactive one that may worsen the situation. Aviation best practices address this by having pilots confronted with a startle or surprise event work through recognition and confirmation phases before taking any action. The recognition phase is where the cognitive process begins. Why is recognition so crucial? To answer this, we can look again at Air France 447. In less than 4.5 minutes between the autopilot disengagement and the Airbus A330's plunge into the Atlantic, the stall warning sounded 75 times, indicating the aircraft's high angle of attack and aerodynamic stall. Yet, the crew remained confused as to the aircraft's true condition. At no point did any pilot use the phrase, "Stall, I have control." Airbus standard phraseology to indicate that the crew member has recognised the stall and is about to execute the memory checklist recovery procedure, required knowledge for all Airbus-rated pilots. During the recognition phase, in a multi-crew environment, observations are best made verbally to bring clarity to a rapidly evolving situation. A structured approach may be helpful, working through the senses. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? What do I smell? For a loss of control in flight, manufacturers offer shortcuts, standard phrases like nose high and nose low to describe the aircraft's state quickly and establish a shared mental model. Observing and verbalizing in this way slows the urge to react hastily and helps prevent incorrect, potentially irreversible actions. Best practice is to keep hands and feet off the flight controls until fully ready to implement a considered response. The confirmation phase follows. This phase buys additional time for recovery and helps counter any errors from the recognition phase by verifying that initial observations have been correctly interpreted. On approach to Houston, the first officer of Atlas Air Flight 3591 inadvertently activated go-around mode, increasing thrust and altering the aircraft's pitch. Disoriented, he mistook this response for a stall and exclaimed, "We're stalling," even though no stall warnings had sounded. He then applied a strong nose-down control input, sending the aircraft into a steep 46-degree dive. The captain was occupied with other tasks at the time. By the time he could intervene, the dive had become unrecoverable. 16 seconds after the first officer's exclamation, the Boeing 767 crashed into Trinity Bay at nearly 13,000 feet per minute. This tragedy underscores how misinterpretations can escalate rapidly and the importance of verification and vigilant monitoring in high-stakes situations. Ideally, all crew members should positively confirm to ensure a shared understanding or mental model. But confirmation doesn't always require input from the entire crew. Sometimes it's as simple as cross-checking alternative sources of information. Consider West Air Sweden Flight 294, a Canadair CRJ-200 on a night cargo flight from Oslo to Tromsø on January 8, 2016. A malfunctioning system produced erroneous attitude indications on the captain's instruments, showing the aircraft pitching sharply nose up. When the autopilot disengaged, The captain instinctively responded to the false climb indication by pitching the nose down 40 degrees and banking steeply. At the time the autopilot disengaged, the first officers and standby indicators showed that the aircraft was actually level. A quick cross-check would have clarified the aircraft's true attitude, potentially averting the loss of control. Instead, the captain's instinctive action complicated what was a minor instrumentation failure, and the crew remained unable to resolve the conflicting information. Within 80 seconds, the aircraft accelerated to over 510 knots, well beyond its limit of 315 knots, and crashed. The idea of going through recognition and confirmation phases might sound simple, but it is so effective that they are implemented and trained as the first step of the memory procedures for recovery from a loss of control in-flight event. Airbus even has standard phraseology and callouts published as part of the process to speed up the building of a shared mental model on the flight deck. Maybe you're thinking now, hey, that's all really interesting, but things don't tend to go bang in my workplace, and I can't envision any circumstances under which I'm going to lose control of my desk. But remember our definition of surprise: an unexpected event causing a discrepancy between our expected and actual circumstances. Just because a surprise is minor, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't need to be acknowledged and dealt with. Although the recognition and confirmation protocol has been born out of the need for better results around the prevention of and recovery from loss of control incidents, many pilots now use it as the starting point for dealing with any unexpected event. Even when mildly surprised, asking yourself, what am I dealing with here? And am I reading this right? Going through a recognition and confirmation protocol is a great start in mitigating against jumping to conclusions, reacting hastily, and making bad decisions leading to adverse outcomes or regret. In fact, maybe you don't need to do anything at all. Okay, back to the flight deck. Ideally, we'd like to avoid surprises altogether. Knowledge of aircraft systems, application of procedures, and situational awareness can help us somewhat in this regard. But there are still going to be times when the unexpected occurs. Preparation and training can possibly mitigate against the most cognitively debilitating effects. So how does a pilot prepare for unexpected events? By threat or risk analysis, asking what-if questions to determine what kinds of unexpected events may occur, and mentally preparing plans for how to react. By anticipating possible threats at different phases of flight, our pilot can establish frameworks and management strategies in advance for conceivable events, such as engine failures or adverse weather. Having these mental models ready makes it easier to recover from startle and overcome the cognitive delay caused by surprise. During flight planning, and again at takeoff and arrival briefings, pilots will make flight-specific threat analysis and as a team discuss how they will mitigate against them. Pre-considering potential unexpected events primes their brains to expect possible disruptions and potentially reducing the shock of a real event. Pilots also use mental imagery or visualization to mentally rehearse and embed in memory how they would handle specific abnormal situations. This is particularly useful for the memory checklist established by manufacturers. Mental imagery plays such a big role in a pilot's toolkit that we'll revisit it in depth in a future episode. Now, I know that many pilots follow the podcast. For pilots looking for resources now, check out our chair flying video on the Performance Pilot YouTube channel. But beyond pilots and athletes, there are many professions that use visualization to plan actions before they face real threats, mentally rehearsing responses to unexpected scenarios. This technique enables them to pivot quickly during surprises. US Navy SEAL training places particular emphasis on preparing mentally. It's one of their big 4 essential skills designed to help SEALs stay agile in volatile situations. Standardized checklists, from healthcare to aviation, reduce cognitive overload and foster organized responses under pressure. Having embedded structures and frameworks to fall back on aids us overcome startle and surprise by cognitively focusing on what's most critical, even while we are recovering physiologically. For instance, healthcare professionals follow surgical safety checklists during complex procedures. Soldiers and police officers rely on tactical protocols to ensure clarity and structure in high-stake missions. Clear, structured plans allow each team member to focus on their role, distributing responsibility across the team. They help prevent tunnel vision by dividing cognitive load. When team members follow set procedures, they work through stress as part of a coordinated system. This shared accountability promotes psychological safety and ensures critical tasks are approached with calm efficiency, enhancing collective performance. But how do we prepare for black swan events? Those incidents that, by nature, can't be anticipated. Here, preparation can still be beneficial. Rather than having a set play to fall back on, we can establish a set of priorities and decision-making tools. Having pre-established frameworks gives us a starting point. We've already discussed priorities in our episode on automation, and one decision-making tool in the Decide episode. Pilots also prepare for startle and surprise through training. Habituating pilots by exposing them to high-stress, unexpected scenarios in the simulator allows them to both become familiar with the physiological effects of startle and rehearse recovery techniques. Repeated exposure to high-stress situations builds resilience, inoculating pilots to stress and reducing the likelihood of freezing or making rushed decisions. Simulation is a powerful method to mentally and physically prepare for high-stress situations. Surgeons, for example, use surgical simulations to practice for emergencies, and firefighters practice incident responses for specific hazards. Elite military units too go through intense simulations involving live rounds to prepare for combat scenarios, allowing them to normalise their reactions to stress and startle in a controlled setting. Through familiarity with our own stress response, we're able to redirect our focus from anxiety to well-practiced protocols. Beyond these extreme examples, habituation through gradual exposure may be beneficial for any aspect of our occupations that we feel stressed. Habituation helps normalise the stress response, making it easier to manage. This principle is widely applied in fields like law enforcement and public speaking, where individuals practice facing challenging audiences to desensitise themselves to negative reactions. Controlled exposure to high-stress situations teaches our bodies to adapt, reducing fear's hold over time. Post-flight, many, if not most pilots, take the time to discuss what went well and what could have gone better. Maybe you've picked up this theme in our earlier episodes. This occurs even after routine flights. You'd be surprised how long pilots will spend pulling apart the nuances of their last landing. Going through a debrief after dealing with unexpected events, we can analyse our reactions, decision-making processes, and outcomes. This reflection allows us to identify areas for improvement and reinforces learning, making us better prepared for future surprises, more resilient. Many of the reactions to startle and surprise are also seen with our reaction to stress, attentional tunnelling, distraction, increased reaction times, cognitive degradation, degraded problem solving, performance rigidity, and degraded working memory function. Maybe not surprisingly then, the means for overcoming startle and surprise can also be used for overcoming performance-related stress. So next time you're faced with a situation that leaves you startled, surprised, feeling anxious, stressed, or overwhelmed, pause. Stop and recognise what you're dealing with, and then confirm that you have the facts straight before making a considered response or falling back on a protocol you have workshopped in anticipation. Cognitive change, that is, changing behaviour, takes time and involves much repetition to become embedded and yield the full benefit of increased performance. The more you use this recognise and confirm technique, the more effective it becomes. So, next time something unexpected happens to you, recognise and confirm before you respond. By applying this strategy, you can gradually reduce the negative impacts of startle, surprise, or stress on performance and increase your ability to thrive in high-pressure situations. In our next episode, part 2 of our exploration of overcoming startle and surprise, we'll be moving beyond this cognitive response, adding a layer, giving you a simple but highly effective physiological method for resetting cognitive control. Athletes do it. Public speakers do it. The US Navy SEALs included as part of their Big Four. If you'd like to support the Like a Pilot podcast, our Patreon page is available at patreon.com/likeapilot. For more information, check out the show notes at philwilkes.com/podcast. The Like a Pilot podcast is written and produced by me, Phil Wilkes. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Like a Pilot podcast. If you've liked the show, please remember to rate, share, and review. It makes a big difference.